Hello, my name is Carrie Friedman, and I am director of the Learn Network. Welcome to our first Learn to Scale workshop in our series on designing, testing, and scaling educational products. The Learn Network is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences to support the scaling of evidence-based practices and programs that have the potential to accelerate learning. Our network includes 4 research and development teams, also funded by IES, to enhance existing reading and math products and prepare them for scale. SRI International leads the network, and we facilitated training, coaching, and collaborative activities with these R&D teams to build their capacity for scale. Through these efforts, we built out our framework and tools, and this workshop series will help bring some of those resources to life. We'll provide information, lessons learned, and examples, and explore some scaling activities that have been particularly useful for those in the network. So today, as this is our introductory workshop, we'll spend a little bit of time grounding ourselves in what it means to scale and to take research to market. We'll review our framework, invent, apply, transition, and key concepts and processes for scaling. We'll also hear from a couple of leaders of evidence-based educational products on their scaling journeys to illuminate some key scaling activities. Then we're going to spend about 15 minutes in breakout sessions discussing your initial ideas about scaling goals and pathways. And whether or not you've thought about this before, I think it will be a useful opportunity to start to apply some of what we discussed today. With the remaining time, we'll share our ideas for additional workshops and ask you to provide some input on what you think would be most supportive of your next steps on your scaling journey. So if we go to the next slide, I'm joined today by 2 other leaders on the Learn Network, Dr. Rebecca Griffiths and Dr. Adrian Woods. And we also have members of our team today who contributed and will be part of the breakout sessions that I'd like to acknowledge. And that is Julie Kelleher, Aaron Smith, Morgan Solander, and Keith Hugh Miller. We're also going to be joined by a couple, as I mentioned, leaders of evidence-based products who we'll introduce a little later. I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca, who's going to kick off some of our content.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning. I guess it is afternoon probably for everyone in the United States. So just to kick us off, I wanted to just give a quick definition of how we think about scaling and scale. We like to distinguish between the process of scaling, which we've defined as achieving widespread and sustainable use and impact, and the state of scale, which we sort of think of as something that we work towards. What's really important about the process is that it's not just about trying to reach as many people as possible with your educational invention or innovation. It's also about building organizational capacity to continue to maintain, update, and provide your solution to your target audience over time, to secure buy-in for the stakeholders that are the target for your intervention or have some other investment in it, and to maintain the relevance and efficacy. So all of these dimensions of scaling require concerted effort and organizational capacity in addition to just reaching people. The state of scale also can be thought of in multiple dimensions. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to reach every K-12 school district across the United States or the world. You might have, your mission might be to go deep into a particular geographic region and to really have a concentrated impact in a specific population. You might be targeting a small but really critical population of students, say students who have low incidence disabilities, in which case your target audience might be quite small in terms of numbers, but your scaling target might be to try to reach as many of those people as that are defined by your mission as possible. Next. Why focus on scaling? I'm guessing that people who are here already understand why this is important, but just quickly, we wanted to mention that the scaling is not just about achieving widespread impact. It is also, we also think of this as critical to ensure that you are providing access to your to your wonderful invention or solution to as many students as possible, especially the students who may be in under-resourced school districts who are less likely to have access to resources than the general population. We also think about scaling in terms of sustainability and making sure that you are making the best possible use of the investment that has gone into developing your innovation as possible. Often interventions can achieve greater cost effectiveness by reaching more people, meaning the marginal cost for each additional student or teacher or school district actually comes down the more people you reach. And that can be an important consideration, both in thinking about the return on investment for, say, philanthropic or taxpayer dollars, as well as for the districts or the schools if they are being asked to help to contribute resources to supporting the attention. And it should always be, especially for those of us who tend to do research and development using public funding or philanthropic resources, we may feel a greater responsibility to ensure that we are shepherding those resources well. Next. Uh, One way to think about Another way to think about scaling is in this what's known as an S curve. This is widely used in sort of innovation of diffusion research. It basically shows how a typical innovation, and this can be an individual product or a whole product category, tends to scale through a population with these different segments. And a couple of things we want to highlight here are one, that these segments are not the same. The people in the innovator group that tend to be the earliest adopters of a new innovation tend to have more access to resources. They tend to have higher social capital, and they tend to have more institutional capacity than some of the folks who are in these later categories of adopters. So that means that if your intervention is only reaching the folks in that innovator category, typically about the first couple percentage of a population, then you may not be reaching the people that you care most about. And so that's one reason that it's really important to try to push through and think ambitiously about who you're trying to reach. We think it's a sort of a useful exercise to think about the target audience for your intervention. Say it's a math program that you're targeting uh, uh, K through 6 teachers, is to actually quantify how many teachers are in that target population and what would it look like to try to reach 2.5%, 13.5%. What would it look like in terms of the number of people you would have to reach, what a marketing strategy might look like, and the organizational capacity that you would have to build in order to serve that large an audience. Next. We often see projects that originate in academic or nonprofit settings pursue a sort of open education resource strategy where the thinking is that I will develop this wonderful thing and I will put it out into the world and it will automatically get adopted by, as many people as possible. And what we wanted to just to clarify is that even putting something out for free, even when you put something out for free, that product or intervention is still participating in a sort of marketplace where it's characterized by voluntary choices. The teachers and students have a choice over whether or not they're going to use the resource you've created. Their information flow, so they have to be aware of it. There are almost always competing solutions, so teachers and districts choosing between your intervention and other solutions to the problems of practice they aim to address. There are regulations and other aspects of the environment that your product or intervention is entering into. So it's really important to be kind of intentional in thinking about the environment that you're putting your resource into, who the decision makers are, how they get access to information, what their criteria are for selecting what solutions they're going to use, and to integrate those kinds of considerations into your plan. Next. And we just thought we'd share this concept because these are really it's a cute idea. This is an argument or an observation that's been made in the open education resource community for a long time, which is that when we put out OER materials, we tend to think of it as a free beer. Like you give it to somebody, they drink it, they go home, and everyone's happy. But it actually can be more like a free puppy because when a district decides to adopt an open education resource, they still have to consider how it's going to be maintained, how it's going to be updated, how it integrates with their technology infrastructure. There are lots of considerations about how they're going to sustain the use of this open education resource over time, and whether the provider is going to keep it sustained as well. So those resources can feel more like a free puppy on the side of the adopters. Next. There are some additional scaling challenges, and I promise after this I'm going to share some more optimistic notes. So on the demand side, it's probably important to note that the market is really awash in vendors and products that are offering solutions. Many of them don't have support for districts, and it can be very hard to discern quality. So this is just something that we have to be aware of when we're offering new solutions into the market, that it's a very crowded place, and school districts are just often feeling bombarded by all of these offerings and having a hard time distinguishing what they should try. On the supply side, again, those of us who are working in academic or nonprofit mission-driven environments don't necessarily have the incentive structures, access to the networks of seed capital investors or venture capitalists or incubators that an education tech startup might have, that sort of helps to sort of smooth that path to the marketplace. We may not have skills and expertise within our teams for developing a go-to-market plan and knowing how to commercialize a product or service if that's what we have developed. So we also face some challenges on our side as well in trying to navigate the differences in the environments that we work in with the conditions that are typically more conducive to scaling in a commercial environment. Next. All that said, there are examples of fantastic education innovations that came out of research that are evidence-based and that have achieved significant scale and impact in the world. We're really excited to have Janice Gobert here with us, who is the CEO and founder of Inkits, which is an online education environment for science, here to share some of her gems of wisdom from her experience in getting Inkits off the ground. A couple of these other projects I might quickly highlight our Cognitive Toy Box, which was started by a graduate student at NYU and recently sold their intellectual property to a company called Teaching Strategies, and got integrated into their gold assessment solution. Field Day is based at the University of Wisconsin and has developed, it's a platform for developing games. Their games have been used by millions of students. So again, having a really large impact in the world. And of course, many of you are probably familiar with PhET, which launched 2 decades ago and since then has served over 1.5 billion simulations to learners all around the world, enhancing their understanding of scientific and mathematical concepts. Each of these projects pursued a distinctive path to scale. They all made different kinds of choices. We've actually written stories of scaling to chronicle some of the interesting choices they made in their paths, and those stories are available on our website, and we'll probably be touching on them as we go through this presentation today.
All right, well, thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our framework for scaling. It's called Invent, Apply, Transition, and we can go to that next slide. So the Invent, Apply, Transition, or we call it the IAT framework, is a systematic approach that we developed at SRI to bring research to market. And each stage of innovation includes activities that embed support for scaling throughout the research and development lifecycle. So early in that first stage, invent, you're really trying to understand a problem of practice or a need, and then invent a solution that is going to address that need. And you're focused on your user. So often in education, that's going to be your teacher, your student, your caregiver, and what's going to work for them. And then as you further define the solution and try it out in the next stage, apply, you improve your product or approach so that it satisfies the needs of that end user and also meets the needs of the broader market. And then in that final stage of innovation transition, you're having satisfied the needs of your users, your customers, your market, and you're thinking about how to forge a path to scale. And now to enhance this model, we can go back for just one sec. To enhance the model for the education context, the Learn Network integrated some principles of liberatory design, which is a design approach that addresses some of the complexity in the education system. And notably, we incorporated the notice and reflect modes in the design phases of invent and apply. And this really just encourages researchers and developers to practice self-awareness and situational awareness in their process, and use key pauses to reflect on their intention and their impact and be really open to adaptation. So now we can go to the next slide. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into what happens at each of these stages, and then we'll talk about some resources. So in the invent and apply stage, these are often concurrent with traditional research and development, and activities in the invent stage typically occur when you're doing need sensing, lit review, you're developing your theory of change, and then maybe you're doing some early development and testing of a prototype. And then where you move into apply is when you might typically do your piloting and your impact and efficacy studies. And invent is represented there by that pink circle. During the invent stage, we focus on what's called product user fit, which just means satisfying the needs of the people who are actually going to use your product. And as I mentioned, for products in education, often that's teachers, students, and caregivers. And the product has to be both aligned with their goals, like improving outcomes or increasing engagement, but it also has to be accessible, usable, convenient, and really fit within their day. Moving out to the yellow circle, apply focuses more on product market fit, which means satisfying the requirements of your target market. And that includes users, but it also includes customers, who are those who are going to actually select and ultimately purchase the product. And for educational products, the customers are more typically district staff or school leaders. And these decision makers often have requirements that go beyond the user, like integration with existing programs and infrastructure, or the need to meet local or federal policy requirements. You can go to the next slide. So this is a little overview of the transition stage, the last stage. Well, it's last in our framework, we're thinking about transition from early on if we want to develop a scalable solution. So as we sort of alluded to earlier, scaling typically means serving more students, which means needing more resources. And this is true whether you're seeking a profit or you want to offer your product at low or no cost. You really need to generate resources for sustainable scale. And there are three main pathways through which you can do this, and they're not mutually exclusive. You might have a hybrid approach. So I'll tell you a little bit about each one. The first is launching an enterprise. So enterprise can include both for-profit, commercial enterprises, and nonprofit organizations. And an early stage enterprise is typically called a startup, and launching a startup could look different depending on your organization and team. It could be as simple as just renaming your group and establishing really clear roles and responsibilities for team members, or as complex as sort of building from the ground up, developing a whole new structure and environment. Either way, the important part about building an enterprise is to make sure you have clear commitment and the right staffing to support launching. So often you will need at least 1 to 2 full-time leaders to launch an enterprise. The second is obtaining additional grants or external funding. And we know grant funding can support scaling a product. However, typically grantors want to support development and enhancement so a product can ultimately become self-sustaining. So there are federal and foundation programs that have a scaling component. Often that's used to support doing some product adaptations and getting it ready for scale, and maybe some of those early enterprise development efforts. And then sometimes there are foundations or university partners that will provide some ongoing funding for scale and sustaining. Scaling a single product for a single market segment can be sort of difficult in an environment where there are large providers who have a suite of solutions. In addition, going out on your own, you'll have significant overhead expenses like legal costs, human resources, and IT. And for these reasons, many developers want to consider a third path, licensing, or pursuing acquisition by a more established provider as a path to scale. And this pathway can be really fitting, especially if your innovation is augmenting something that's out there or aligns with an existing solution. Typically, you're going to need to show that your product has achieved some scale before this becomes an option. So often you'll pursue launching an enterprise or getting enough grant funding to support scaling so that you can achieve some scale before you're able to identify sale or licensing opportunities. So go to the next slide. Our Learn to Scale toolkit really includes a lot of detail about these 3 stages of innovation, along with resources and tools. I'm going to skip the demo just for time and encourage you all to check out the toolkit. There's a link in the chat. Some highlights there. There's some videos that are good explainers, and it really goes through all the stages with information about the different activities you can do. There's templates, there's tools like protocols for user interviews, to things like what tools do I need to scale implementation. And so that's a really great resource to use, and you can identify your on-ramp where you are sort of in your research and development process to figure out which stage to get started with. So we can go to the next slide. We're going to take some time to illustrate some of these scaling activities and concepts by having a couple leaders from 2 evidence-based educational products provide you some examples from their scaling journey. So we have Margaret Troyer from Starry and Janice Gobert from Inkits. We'll start with Margaret and let her tell you a little bit about the Starry scaling journey.
Hi, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Margaret Troyer. I am the Director of Literacy at the SERP Institute. SERP stands for Strategic Education Research Partnership, and we are a small nonprofit. You can see there's about 14 of us total, and our mission is explicitly to work at the intersection of research, practice, and design to design scalable solutions to problems of practice and education. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is STARI, which is the Strategic Adolescent Reading Intervention. It is a standalone Tier 2 intervention for students in grades 6 and up who read 2 or more years below grade level. And I mentioned that the SERP team as a whole is small. The STARI team's even smaller. There are about 3 people other than myself on the STARI team. So we're small but mighty, and that is definitely a factor when you think about our scaling journey. So one thing that I will say is that because our mission involves thinking about scale, we really do think about scale from the very beginning. So when STARI was designed, it was designed to be usable by sort of the average teacher. We didn't, have grad students teaching STARI and then try to figure out how to fit it into a regular teacher's schedule and sort of areas of expertise. So we think about scale from the beginning. We think about how we're going to support teachers and how we're going to make this work in the day-to-day environment of school. So to illustrate that, I'm going to tell one story and then also mention a strategy briefly at the end. So my story is about STARI professional learning. So prior to COVID, all of our professional learning took place in person. It was, 2 or 3 full days over the summer where we tried to cram all the knowledge about STARI into teachers' heads and then hope that they didn't forget it, during the course of the school year. And this also was prohibitively expensive for schools because they had to pay to fly a couple of us out there and pay for 2 full days of our time, plus prep and materials, and it just wasn't scalable. So when COVID hit, we had no choice but to hurry up and try to put our professional learning online. And then we decided to really take some time to make a super high quality, in my own humble opinion, asynchronous version of our professional learning. And so that went online, about a year, 2021-ish, and has been available since then. So now anybody anywhere can access our professional learning for a fairly low fee and do it asynchronously. So this is great for, small schools that may only have 1 STARI teacher or 2 STARI teachers and could never afford to do an in-person professional learning. However, what we found is that asynchronous professional learning is still not meeting all the needs of the market. So about a year ago, New York City asked us to do live virtual trainings, full day trainings, 6 hours, and to take our 17-session asynchronous professional learning series and to put it into 3 6-hour days, which are repeated multiple times over the course of the school year. And at first, we actually tried to talk them out of it because we said, like, 6-hour virtual training is going to be terrible. Nobody wants to do that. And they insisted. So we said, okay. And we worked really hard to design a good training. And it actually went much better than I could have expected. The uptake has been great. Around about December, January, New York said, all of your trainings are full with a wait list. We need you to add more to the calendar. So we did. Which also meant increasing the size of our team and getting some more presenters trained and ready to do this. And the feedback from teachers has been really, really positive. So we actually decided that this summer we're going to host a couple of live virtual 6-hour trainings that are open to the public. Because sometimes it's just easier to show up at a certain place and time than to do something asynchronously. And it's somewhat counterintuitive. You think if it's asynchronous, it can fit into your schedule at your convenience, but it's sometimes hard to find time to do those things. And it's easier to just be at your computer on a certain day and time and get the training that way. So that's one sort of evolution and journey that we've made in our scaling process. And I'll also end by just saying, in addition to these things that are sort of just happening due to circumstances and people asking us for things, we have also engaged in some more deliberate marketing strategies. And I would say that the most effective of those would be the paid Ed Week webinar that we did. We got almost 1,000 people registered and 300 and some attended in person, but we got the email addresses for the full close to 1,000, and now they're on our email list so that we have a way to communicate with them. So that's my story and then my tip. And I think I can't take questions, but I'm happy to answer questions in the chat if you have them.
Yeah, thank you. Please, if you have questions for Margaret, please put them in the chat. We're going to go next to Janice.
Hi, I'm Janice Gobert. I am the CEO of a company called Apprentice that produces a product called Inkits. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. So my grad students, former grad students, Mike Sao Pedro and Cam Betts and I started this company when I was a professor at WPI in Massachusetts, Worcester Polytechnic, and I had a IES rather research grant and had many NSF grants prior and another IES grant prior to that one. And I went to an AERA session that was hosted by IES on the SBIR program. And at that point, I was talking to one of the program officers and they said, wow, we know Inkits, you should turn it into a product. So I said, that's interesting. So the three of us actually turned it into a product, and we formed this company called Apprentice. And the apprentice is from the French word apprendre, to learn. But apprendre is actually to learn in many languages, Portuguese and French among them. So we established the company in 2012 so that we could go after these SBIR grants. And we did. We've had a few SBIR grants right now, I think 5 to date. And Mike Sao Pedro serves as the PI on those because I'm a professor at Rutgers Graduate School of Education. And we went to market in 2016 with our product. Our team size is 6 at present, but then I have, grad students and a postdoc and people who work on the research side, which really helps bolster the product, which is important. So what Inkits is, it stands for Inquiry Intelligent Tutoring System. It's a patented online platform. It does real-time performance assessment based on students' mouse clicks, students' interactions within a virtual platform that includes simulations that they play with, like the PhET simulations that you might know. We scaffold students in real time using machine learning, knowledge engineering, and natural language processing algorithms. And we alert the teacher in real time to support their real-time instruction of a whole class, small groups for differentiated instruction, one-to-one. And our alerting dashboard was initially funded by an SBIR, actually, as an interesting example of, how these various different kinds of grants play together. So Inkits is in use with, 2 million labs have been done. I believe 250,000 students to date, 17,000 teachers, I believe, to date, grades 4 through 10, and it's for math and science. So if you think of the next generation science standards, there's a series of science practices, what's called practices or competencies or skills, and the math associated with those. So we assess those in real time, jump in real time, alert the teacher in real time. Next slide, please. So the product evolved organically and it evolved piecemeal because it involved, kind of developing a prototype for something, maybe through an SBIR, then fleshing it out with a research grant and developing really nice research around to show its efficacy, its validity, say, for example, of the scaffolds, the validity of the algorithms, etc. So we've really had a nice partnership between our research grants and our SBIR grants. Our first customers had to be interested enough in Inkits to use what was ready. So when we went to market in 2016, and be willing to overcome things that weren't ready, right? So we didn't have a dashboard, for example. We were alerting and scaffolding only on certain NGSS practices, etc. And we used early pilots and sales to address the, what's typically known as the nice to have features versus the need to have features. And this is particularly important, I think, from a business standpoint, of course, and scaling. You have to have the need to have features, right? And the interesting thing about working with a technical team of computer scientists is the good news is they love to develop. The bad news is they love to develop. So you have to really separate out the need to have versus the nice to have. We've played with a bunch of different sales models. So we first had a freemium model with free trials. Then we offered pilots. Then we offered 4-packs. And we eventually settled on 2 different packages. So we have an 8-pack that's 8 science topics, each with 3 or 4 investigations or driving questions. And then an unlimited pack, which offers 160 labs across most middle school and early high school science topics. And basically what a student does, just to give you a sense of it, a student goes in, forms a question using widgets and simulations and such. They collect data with a simulation. They interpret their data. They do the mathematics and the graphing, the equation building, etc. for that phenomenon. They warrant their claims from their table, and then they write claim evidence reasoning statements, and we're auto-scoring all aspects and jumping in to help the student in real time and alerting the teacher in real time. So about 2 million labs have been done to date. And we're active to date, we've been active in 50 states, and we're actually have been active in 12 countries. And we got a fair amount of scale when COVID hit because science teachers were looking for virtual labs. So that was a good opportunity. And at that point, I remember Ed Metz, our program officer, calling me on the phone and saying, hey, can you give this away for free? Or will you give this away for free? And the joke that I like to make is, I'm not a business person. I'm not a real CEO, but I do know that giving it away for free is probably not the best business model. But nonetheless, we did give it away for free worldwide. Teachers signed up from 90 countries, some of whom, didn't continue with it, didn't actually, log on and make accounts and sign it out to their students. But many did. And we learned a lot about what it would take to support teachers in this asynchronous way. So I'm interested in what Margaret said about the asynchronous virtual training, because teachers really need to, know how to use these tools, right? And when you design a training, they can't be passively, like the students, we don't want them passively listening. We want them actually actively doing something so that they can remember what to do, and they can enact the platform with fidelity for the purposes for which it was designed. So I'll stop there. I'm eager to address any questions that you have, and there's a video in the chat that someone posted. So we were just featured at the NSTA conference in Philadelphia on our about our platform, and we're really excited about that. So thank you so much.
All right. So I think we're going to transition to our breakout discussions because we know that this is a bit of a new and different way of thinking than I think many of us in education are used to. We have actually found it really useful to hear from like-minded individuals and other teams about their own processes and their own goals for scaling. So we're going to break you into smaller groups to introduce yourselves and to share briefly just what you're considering as a potential scaling pathway, help you learn from each other. It's okay if you don't really have one in mind yet. This is a bit of idea generation and just idea sharing at this point. Next slide. So to start, we're going to do a Mad Libs introduction, which is just a very brief overview of who you are, what you're working on, or what you've invented or developed, and who it's for. So here's an example, and this is a real example of something I'm working on. Hi, everyone. My name is Adrienne Woods, and I work for SRI. I'm developing an AI-based tool that helps redact individualized education programs, or IEPs, and categorize IEP data for special education research at any age. The users of my product are both special education administrators and researchers. Make sense? Easy enough. So we've dropped this Mad Libs outline in the chat, so you'll have it once you get into your breakout room. If you could go to the next slide, please. Once you've done your Mad Libs intro, these are the discussion questions that we'd love for you all to chat about. Again, I wanted to say that it's important to note that scaling pathways can change too. So, there's no wrong answers. Whatever you share right now does not have to be your sort of be all end all scaling goal. Just, letting us know where your heads are and generating ideas from your colleagues if you're not quite sure yet. So with that said, I think Keith is going to assign you all to breakout rooms. We're going to spend about 12 minutes doing this. And each breakout room is going to have a Learn moderator. So we'll see you all in there. What's next is we're hoping to do a couple of additional workshops on topics that are most of interest to you all. Note I said workshops and not webinars because we'd like these to be very much like what the breakout rooms just were, very interactive and a way for you to kind of work with each other and to develop strategies and tools that are really specific to your unique products and developments. So for topics that are not as high up on your interest list, we are still going to plan to cover those. But we will pre-record those topics instead of having those as workshops. So as we go through, I'm going to explain what each topic is, and then I hope that you all will fill out a link to an interest survey at the very end. You'll let us know which topics are most of interest to you and which ones you'd like to see as those sort of interactive workshops. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to walk you through these topics, very brief, high-level overview of each, and then please remember to stick around and vote. Next slide. Go to the first session. This first one is user engagement. So in this session, we're going to talk about how to identify both the features of your product that make users want to keep using it, and also how to identify your champions, or those users who are most eager to adopt your innovation, willing to share it with their networks, willing to really promote it. So we'll talk about how do you learn about your users' needs, both initially when you're developing your innovation, as well as after you've piloted and you're kind of working to develop your minimally viable product. We'll talk about user and decision maker satisfaction, which comes from 4 components called performance, reliability, convenience, and cost. And then we'll share how all of this information can help you develop your elevator pitch. Next slide, please. This next session would be about market requirements. So this is, we talked about how your end users might not actually be the ones who are making the decisions about whether or not to start using your product. So this session will help you kind of map out who are your key players and your decision makers, and how do you engage those folks, as well as how do you define what your particular segment of the market is and what are your particular market requirements. Next slide. The next session is the preparing to scale. So it's going to go a little bit deeper into the scaling pathways topic that we just worked on today in breakout groups. We're going to add to this by talking about topics like how well does your product fit into the existing market? How do you figure that out? What internal resources would you need to accrue to follow each pathway to scale? How would you think about distributing news of your product to your key market segments and your players? Next slide. Packaging, positioning, and messaging. So this is going to dive into how do you really spread the word about your product. So positioning means how is your target audience going to understand the value of their product, of your product, and what makes it unique. Packaging is how is your product going to be accessed, licensed, and implemented. So does it include training or professional development? If it includes content or curriculum, how is that going to be accessed? Will there be a cost associated with licensing your product? And then messaging means how do you describe your product to target audiences? Next slide. The go-to-market strategy is an actionable plan that lays out very concrete, internal planning steps as well as external execution steps. So you are able to focus your time and energy on marketing to the customers that are most likely to derive value from your product. And this can include things like mapping out quarterly themes, events, and opportunities, developing different marketing campaign objectives and timelines. When should you do all these things? Selecting and prioritizing marketing channels, and then how do you track how well this is working or not? Next slide. So this is the last potential session. One of our colleagues, Julie, has been working really hard to develop a sort of playbook for partnering with large language models and conversational chatbots like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. And that can really help you do some of the internal work that's needed to build your marketing capacity, especially if you're a very small team that doesn't have a lot of current marketing expertise or a lot of extra time to spend working on all these things. So this would be things like, you ask a chatbot, help me define my value proposition in 2 sentences, or help me define a quarterly marketing strategy with timelines and dates to disseminate information about my product. And we'll also talk about what AI can and can't do in this context and help you design some of your own chats and prompts. Next slide. Okay, so Keith is going to put the link for the interest survey in the chat. Please do complete this and let us know what topics you'd find most interesting, even if you can't commit to attending multiple other workshops. They will all be recorded. This is going to help us organize and plan these offerings and prioritize what's going to be most useful to you all. And so with that said, please keep an eye out for invitations to register for these upcoming workshops. And that is our webinar for today. Thank you all so much for attending. I would really appreciate your time and your energy and your enthusiasm. And we really hope to see you back soon. Thank you, everyone.